Imagine you are told that to prepare your child for the future, you must send them to live on Mars. You know the environment is hostile. You know the gravity is too low for their bones to harden. The radiation is too high for their cells to stay stable. And the isolation is too vast for their spirits to thrive. But because every other parent is doing it, and because the social pressure feels like a physical weight, you pack their bags. You watch them board the shuttle. Then, you spend the next 10 years wondering why they are returning to Earth fragile and unable to stand on their own 2 feet. This is the reality of the Great Rewiring. Since 2010, we have collectively engaged in a radical, uncontrolled experiment on an entire generation. We have moved childhood from the physical world, the environment we were evolved to navigate, into a virtual world for which the human brain has no biological defense. Jonathan Haidt's book, The Anxious Generation, serves as the post-mortem of this shift. Between 2010 and 2015, the very nature of human development was fundamentally altered. We abandoned a play-based childhood and replaced it with a phone-based one. While the decline in youth mental health is undoubtedly influenced by various factors, from economic pressures to global instability, the best current evidence suggests that the move to a phone-based life is the largest and most pervasive driver of this crisis. You see the results every day. You feel the tension in your home. You see the light of a screen reflecting in your child's eyes while their engagement with the physical world seems to flicker out. This surge of anxiety and the retreat from life is not a mystery. According to Haidt, it is the result of a systemic failure in how we structure modern childhood. We have made what Haidt calls a double mistake. We are overprotecting our children in the real world, where they need independence and risk to develop resilience, while leaving them underprotected in the virtual world. The digital landscape is often hostile to human development, yet we have handed our children a portal to that world and asked them to navigate it alone. This is a call for collective action. We are moving past the theoretical and looking at the hard data, the biological mechanisms, and the practical steps necessary to reclaim a generation. If it feels like you lost control, it is because the environment changed faster than our social norms could adapt. This summary is your roadmap for taking that control back. We are going to dismantle the Great Rewiring, piece by piece, and restore a real-world childhood for the digital age. This is not just a summary, it is a rescue mission. Let's begin. Part 1. The Crisis and the Mechanism of Evidence. To address a problem of this scale, we must first identify the exact moment the environment changed. We have to look at the developmental patterns of childhood and find where the sequence was disrupted. If we want to understand the epidemic of mental illness affecting an entire generation, we need to stop looking only at individual symptoms and start looking at the systemic shifts in how children grow up. In this part, we will examine the data behind the so-called hockey stick surge, the double mistake of modern parenting, in which we overprotect in the real world while underprotecting in the virtual one, and the 4 foundational harms that act as barriers to healthy development for every child born after 1995. To begin this investigation, we must look at the data behind what Haidt calls the Great Rewiring. Let's start with the evidence of the surge. If you look at the historical records from the early 2000s, adolescent mental health was relatively stable. There were fluctuations, of course, but there was no indication of a widespread collapse. In fact, many indicators suggested things were improving. Crime, teen pregnancy, and substance abuse among teens were hitting record lows. It appeared that we were raising the safest and most responsible generation in history. But around 2012, the best current evidence suggests that a tectonic shift occurred. Across the United States, the United Kingdom, Canada, and Australia, the graphs for adolescent depression, anxiety, and self-harm began a sharp, synchronized climb. This is the pattern Haidt calls the hockey stick surge. The numbers for girls are particularly striking. Since 2010, the rate of hospitalizations for non-fatal self-harm among girls aged 10 to 14 has increased by nearly 200%. For boys, the surge manifests differently, often through a retreat into isolation. But the mental health indicators show a similar synchronized decline. We must ask, what happened in 2012? It wasn't a sudden economic crash or a new global conflict. 2012 was the year the Great Rewiring reached a critical mass. This was the year the smartphone transitioned from a luxury for adults to a constant companion for teenagers. It was the year high-speed data became ubiquitous, and, perhaps most importantly, the year the front-facing camera and the like button merged. This transformed every moment of a child's life into a potential social audition. Haidt argues that we moved from a play-based childhood, which had existed for millennia, into a phone-based childhood. We shifted from an environment of physical, embodied, and real-time interaction into one that is disembodied, asynchronous, and designed by engineers to keep users engaged for as long as possible. This transition brings us to a core biological principle explaining why the move was so disruptive: anti-fragility and the biological need for stress. To understand its impact, we must look at the biological requirements of a growing child. Haidt relies on the concept of anti-fragility to explain this. Most people understand the difference between something fragile, like a wine glass that breaks under stress, and something resilient, like a plastic cup that survives it. But human systems, especially the developing brain, are often anti-fragile. An anti-fragile system requires stress, challenge, and minor failures to grow strong. Think of the immune system. If you keep a child in a sterile bubble and never let them encounter dirt or germs, their immune system never learns how to function. Eventually, it may become so poorly calibrated that it starts attacking the body itself, which is a leading theory behind the rise in modern allergies. Haidt argues, based on converging data, that the human mind follows a similar pattern. It is experience expectant. It expects to be challenged. It expects to encounter risky play, walking to the store alone, climbing trees, falling down, and figuring out how to settle arguments on the playground without an adult stepping in. When a child engages in risky play, they are essentially training their brain's fear system. By exposing themselves to heights, speed, or social conflict in a play-based environment, they are helping their brain move from a state of hypervigilance toward a state of curiosity and mastery. They learn that the world is a place of opportunity rather than a constant source of threat. However, starting in the 1980s and 90s, we began to interfere with this biological requirement. We became focused on a culture of safetyism, driven by a fear of stranger danger. Despite the world actually becoming safer for children, we stopped letting our children wander. We stopped letting them stay out until the streetlights came on. We removed high slides and merry-go-rounds from playgrounds, attempting to eliminate any risk of a scraped knee. We made the first half of the double mistake. We overprotected our children in the real world, where they actually needed moderate stress to develop their metaphorical stress would. Think of the trees in the Biosphere 2 experiment. In the 1990s, scientists built a perfect protected environment for plants. The trees grew taller and faster than those in the wild, but they eventually reached a certain height and collapsed. They lacked the stress of the wind. Without wind pushing against them, the trees never developed the deep, sturdy roots and strong bark required to support their own weight. By protecting them from the wind, the scientists accidentally ensured their failure. Haidt suggests we have done something similar to Gen Z. We have raised them in a psychological biosphere, protecting them from every minor slight and unsupervised moment. As a result, they have reached adolescence without the internal strength that comes from navigating real-world challenges. While we were obsessively monitoring our children in the physical world, we were simultaneously handing them smartphones and letting them wander alone into a virtual world. We would never let a 10-year-old walk through a dangerous neighborhood at night. Yet we allow them to create social media accounts where they are exposed to millions of strangers and sophisticated algorithms designed to capture their attention. We have underprotected them in the virtual world, an environment for which they have no evolutionary defense. The digital world is not play. Real-world play is physical, local, and has a low bar for exit. If you don't like a game on the playground, you can walk away. But the digital world is global and permanent. A social mistake doesn't just happen between friends. It happens in front of a digital audience, quantified by likes and comments. By moving childhood onto the phone, we have created foundational harms that displace essential experiences. This lack of protection has resulted in what Haidt identifies as the 4 foundational harms. It is important to be clear, phones are not just a distraction. They act as a displacement mechanism. They block the 4 foundational experiences every human brain needs for healthy development. The first is sleep deprivation. This is a fundamental biological requirement for neural repair and emotional regulation. But a smartphone in a teenager's bedroom is a constant source of stimulation. The blue light from the screen suppresses melatonin, and the social stimulation, the ping of notifications, keeps the brain in a state of high arousal. A sleep-deprived brain is less capable of regulating emotions and processing stress. By allowing phones in bedrooms, we have inadvertently contributed to a generation living in a state of chronic biological exhaustion. The second harm is social deprivation. The human brain expects high-bandwidth social data, eye contact, body language, and physical attunement. When two people are in a room together, their brain waves and heart rates can actually begin to sync up. This is how we build empathy and trust. Digital interaction is often a low-resolution version of this. It is disembodied and often asynchronous. It lacks the social depth the brain needs to develop. When children spend the majority of their time texting or scrolling, they are not getting the social nourishment required to build real-world social competence. The third is attention fragmentation. Smartphones are designed to capture and hold attention, often by shattering it. We have allowed technology to exploit the novelty-seeking instinct of the adolescent brain. The brain is evolved to pay attention to new things because, in the wild, a new sound could mean a predator or a food source. The infinite scroll hijacks this system, keeping the brain in a state of continuous partial attention. By encouraging frequent task switching, we may be increasing ADHD-like traits and making it harder for children to engage in deep work or focused thought. The fourth harm is addiction. This is not a metaphor. The like button, the snap streak, and the autoplay feature are designed to trigger dopamine pathways in a manner similar to a slot machine. For an adolescent, whose ability to self-regulate is still developing, these hooks are incredibly powerful. We have introduced a high-frequency reward system into their daily lives and then expected them to govern themselves against it. This creates a gilded cage where the virtual rewards are constant, but the real-world skills of willpower and executive function remain underdeveloped. When we look beyond individual cases to the global scope, we see a systemic shift that transcends cultural boundaries. Haidt's research emphasizes that this is not just a cultural or local glitch. It is not limited to one country's politics or economic situation. The hockey stick surge is visible in almost every nation that adopted high-speed internet, social media, and smartphones simultaneously. Whether you look at data from Scandinavia, Korea, or Australia, the pattern is remarkably consistent. The moment the phone-based childhood becomes the norm, the mental health of youth begins to decline. This points toward a systemic shift. We have taken a biological system evolved for the real world, one of physical play and embodied community, and migrated it into a virtual world that is disembodied and socially hyper-competitive. All of these factors culminate in a fundamental change in the adolescent psychological state. The move from discovery versus defense. The result of this rewiring is a shift from what Haidt calls discover mode to defend mode. A healthy childhood is a series of discoveries where a child seeks challenges and builds confidence. But a phone-based childhood often forces a child into defend mode. They are constantly defending their reputation, their status, and their sense of self against digital judgment. In defend mode, the brain is scanning for danger, it is anxious and hyper-vigilant. When a brain stays in this state for too long, it biases neural development toward anxiety rather than curiosity. This is why we see such high levels of fragility and a retreat from the challenges of life. We have created an environment that keeps the threat sensor stuck in the on position. We have now seen the evidence, the data surge, the double mistake, and the 4 foundational harms. We know that the shift to a phone-based life has had a profound impact. But to fully understand how to address this, we must look deeper into the hardware. We need to understand how these changes are affecting the actual biology of the mind during its most sensitive periods of growth. In the next part, our goal is to explore the biological and psychological toll. We will look at how the sensitive period of puberty is being shaped and how the digital world may be affecting a child's sense of meaning and spiritual depth. Part 2. The biological and psychological toll. We have explored the data, the hockey stick spike in suffering, and the double mistake of our current culture. Now we must move deeper into the actual biological hardware of the mind. To understand why a generation is struggling, we need to look at the mismatch that occurs when a brain evolved for the physical world is forced to mature in a digital one. The human brain is not a finished product at birth. It is a learning machine designed to be completed by its environment. This is the foundation of experience-expectant development. Your child's brain is born expecting certain inputs to function correctly. It expects eye contact, physical touch, and the messy, high-stakes feedback of a real-world community. These are the essential nutrients of the mind. When those nutrients are replaced by the digital substitutes of the virtual world, the best current evidence suggests the system begins to drift off course. To see why this environment is so damaging, we first have to look at how humans have historically learned to navigate the world through what Haidt calls the protocol of cultural apprenticeship. To understand the biological toll, we must first recognize what childhood represents for the human species. Unlike other animals, humans have an exceptionally long period of dependency, a slow growth phase. This exists because we are the only species that relies on cultural apprenticeship. For thousands of generations, children learned how to be human by watching adults and peers in physical space. They learned through observational learning and mimicry. Much of this process is governed by the mirror neuron system. When you watch someone perform a task or express an emotion, your brain mirrors that activity. You are essentially downloading the social and technical skills of your tribe through your senses. But here is the challenge. The mirror neuron system is evolved for embodied interaction. It requires three-dimensional space. It requires the subtle cues of peripheral vision, the presence of pheromones, and the slight shifts in posture that signal intent. The digital world is a low-bandwidth environment. It is a two-dimensional representation of a complex reality. When children spend their apprenticeship years staring at a screen, they are attempting to learn the nuances of human connection through a filter that strips away most of the data. Haidt argues that the hardware of the brain is simply not receiving the high-fidelity information it needs to build a stable social identity. We have moved from a model of deep apprenticeship to one of surface-level consumption. This apprenticeship isn't just about information, it's about the body, which leads us to a second major defect of the digital world: the loss of physical attunement. For millions of years, human social life was a physical presence. You had to navigate body language and micro-expressions that happen in a fraction of a second. When you are in the same room as someone, your brain is processing thousands of data points every second. A critical part of this is attunement. This is the physiological state where two people's brain waves and heart rates can actually begin to sync up. It is a systemic lock-on that serves as the foundation for empathy and trust. You cannot easily achieve attunement through a text message or an Instagram comment. Even the minor delays in a video call, lags as small as 50 milliseconds, are enough to disrupt the brain's ability to sync with another person. This disruption creates a subtle but constant state of social friction. The brain feels that something is wrong, but it cannot fix the connection. Haidt argues that by depriving a developing brain of consistent, real-world attunement during its most critical years, we are performing an accidental experiment in social starvation. This explains why many young people feel lonely, even though they are technically more connected than any generation in history. They have connectivity, but they lack communion. Beyond the loss of physical presence, we also face the challenge of time, specifically through a phenomenon known as the asynchrony trap. Human interaction is evolved to be synchronous. It happens in real time. If you say something to me, I respond instantly. Our feedback loop is immediate, which allows for the rapid correction of social errors. The digital world, however, is often asynchronous. You post something and then you wait. You send a text and you wait for the bubbles to appear. For a developing adolescent, this waiting is a psychological stressor. During the delay, the brain often enters a hyper-vigilant state, simulating every possible negative outcome. Questions like, "Why haven't they replied?" or "Did I say something wrong?" become constant background noise. This turns a simple social interaction into an ongoing performance review. Because digital communication is low context, it is incredibly easy to misinterpret. Without the clarifying data of tone and body language, the brain often defaults to a negative bias. It assumes the worst. This is why digital drama scales so quickly and why social media can bias brains toward anxiety rather than connection. These communication barriers do more than frustrate us. They actually alter the brain's fundamental operating system, shifting it between what we call discover mode and defend mode. To understand the core of the anxiety epidemic, we must look at the brain's two primary modes of operation: The first is discover mode. This is the growth protocol, driven by curiosity and the desire to learn. When a child is in discover mode, they see the world as a place of opportunity. They take risks, they explore, and they build anti-fragility, the internal strength that comes from navigating challenges. The second is defend mode. This is the survival protocol, driven by the amygdala, the brain's threat detection center. In defend mode, the brain is not looking for opportunities. It is scanning for danger. It is hyper-vigilant and cautious. In a healthy, play-based childhood, children spend the majority of their time in discover mode. They learn that even if they lose a game or get into a minor argument, they will be okay. They learn that the world is generally safe and that they are capable of navigating it. But the great rewiring has biased a generation toward a state of chronic defend mode. Social media is, effectively, a 24/7 surveillance machine. Every post is a social judgment. Every like is a metric of status. For an adolescent, whose brain is hypersensitive to social standing, exclusion feels like a survival threat. When your child is on their phone, they are often not discovering the world. They are defending their reputation. They are scanning for insults and comparing their internal reality to everyone else's polished highlight reel. When the brain stays in defend mode for too long, it can become its default setting. The neural pathways for anxiety become high-speed highways, while the pathways for curiosity and joy are used less frequently. This is the biological reality behind the anxious generation. They are not weak, they are simply being shaped by an environment that keeps their threat sensors stuck in the on position. The reason these shifts are so concerning is that they are happening during a critical window of development, the great architectural remodel that occurs during puberty. To understand why these changes feel so permanent, we have to look at the timing. Puberty is more than just hormonal changes. It is a critical window of neuroplasticity. This is when the brain performs what Haidt calls a great architectural remodel. During this phase, the brain undergoes synaptic pruning, the process of deciding which neural connections to keep and which to throw away. Think of a gardener pruning a hedge. The connections used frequently are strengthened and coated in a high-speed material called myelin. The connections that are not used are cut away. In a play-based childhood, the brain prunes itself to be effective in the physical world. It strengthens the pathways for eye contact, for reading social cues, for resolving physical conflicts, and for managing real-world risks. But in a phone-based childhood, the brain is being shaped for a virtual world. It strengthens the pathways for seeking pseudo-prestige and managing continuous partial attention. It may even prune away the capacity for deep focus because the digital environment only requires short bursts of attention. We risk raising a generation that is digitally fluent but socially and emotionally experience-deprived. They have spent their sensitive period watching life on a screen rather than living it. This hijacks the brain's prestige system. Humans are evolved to care about status, but that status was once earned through bravery, kindness, or skill. Today, it is often quantified by followers and likes. We are hardwiring our children for a social reality that is fundamentally gamified and often empty. While the biological changes are profound, Haidt argues this crisis also has a deeper meaning dimension, which he explores through an interpretive framework called the divinity dimension. This is not a strict empirical claim, but rather a framework for understanding how the digital world affects our sense of meaning. Haidt describes what he calls the divinity scale, a vertical axis of human experience. At the bottom of this scale is the profane. This is the world of base instincts, trivial distractions, and the bottomless feed. At the top is the sacred or the elevated, the world of awe, stillness, and deep connection. Haidt argues that the smartphone acts as a kind of gravity, pulling the user toward the bottom of this scale. Every notification is a trivial distraction. Every outrage bait video is a pull toward social degradation. Human beings seem to need the sacred to feel whole. We need moments of stillness to process our emotions. We need awe, the feeling of being part of something vast, to reset our perspective and move beyond our own egos. But there is no stillness on a smartphone, and there is rarely awe in an infinite scroll. When you fracture a child's attention every 30 seconds, you make it difficult for them to access the deeper dimensions of life. This may explain why many young people describe a sense of emptiness. They have connectivity, but they lack the communion and wisdom that come from deep, unfractured presence. In addition to these psychological and spiritual shifts, we must also consider the practical side of the equation: the massive opportunity cost and the displacement of essential activities. Every hour spent in the virtual world is an hour not spent in the physical one. Haidt refers to this as the displacement protocol. We have already discussed sleep and attention, but consider the physical body. Human beings are evolved to move. Exercise and movement are the brain's natural ways of regulating mood. In a phone-based childhood, the body is often stagnant, eyes fixed on a point inches away, spine slumped, breathing shallow. This physical stagnation has a direct impact on mental health. By displacing physical activity, we are removing one of the primary ways the brain naturally manages stress. We have also displaced synchronous play. Play is the work of childhood. It is the primary mechanism through which children learn to cooperate, compete fairly, and manage their emotions. But play must be real-time. The lag and asynchrony of the digital world shatter the flow of play. Without it, children do not learn how to read a room or tell when a joke has gone too far. They do not develop the social calluses that come from being part of a physical group. We have traded high-stakes real-world learning for zero-stakes virtual distraction. We have removed the wind, and the result is a generation of trees that struggle to support their own weight. To review, we have seen several systemic failures in this part. First, the mismatch of cultural apprenticeship, where the mirror neuron system is disconnected from the environment it requires. Second, the disembodied mismatch, where we have starved the brain of physical attunement. Third, the asynchrony trap, which replaces real-time connection with a high-stress performance model. Fourth, we have seen how the brain's operating system is being biased toward defend mode, locking in a state of chronic anxiety. Fifth, we have examined the synaptic pruning of puberty and how it is shaping brains for digital consumption rather than real-world competence. Sixth, we looked at the divinity dimension and the flattening of the soul. And seventh, we considered the displacement of sleep, movement, and play. This is the biological rewiring of the anxious generation. It is an environment we have created, but it affects boys and girls in profoundly different ways. In the next part, our goal is to show you exactly how this crisis targets the relational lives of girls and the real-world engagement of boys differently. It is time to look at the specific tactics of the virtual world. Part 3: Gendered Harms and Digital Contagion. We have explored the data and the biological rewiring of the brain. We have identified the double mistake of our modern culture. Now, we must address a critical reality. The digital environment does not affect every child in the same way. According to Haidt's analysis, the harms of the phone-based childhood are often sex-linked. If you are a parent, an educator, or a leader, you have likely noticed that the crisis manifests differently depending on whether you are looking at a girl or a boy. The symptoms are different, the delivery systems are different, and the long-term damage follows distinct trajectories. In this part, we will look at the gendered logic of the Great Rewiring. We will examine how the virtual world affects the relational lives of girls, and how it has contributed to a retreat from the physical world for boys. Finally, we will look at the phenomenon of digital contagion, the way social media can act as a spreader for psychological distress and sociogenic illness. To understand why these differences exist, we must first look at the underlying biological differences and the sex-linked vulnerabilities that Haidt discusses. For several decades, social sciences often focused on the idea that boys and girls are blank slates, and that any differences in behavior were purely a result of social conditioning. However, the best current evidence suggests that boys and girls enter the world with different evolutionary legacies. On average, girls tend to be more focused on relational harmony and social inclusion. They are often more sensitive to the nuances of group dynamics and social standing. Boys, on average, tend to be more focused on hierarchical status and competition within a physical arena. When you introduce the smartphone, it interacts with these different psychological profiles in unique ways. It is not a coincidence that the hockey stick surge for girls began exactly when social media platforms became visual and mobile. Nor is it a coincidence that the crisis for boys often manifests as a failure to launch into the real world. With those biological foundations in mind, we can see how this plays out in real time, starting with the unique crisis facing girls through visual comparison and relational warfare. For a young girl, social life is often the primary driver of identity. Her standing within her peer group is a central concern. Evolutionarily, girls are often more attuned to social cues. They are social detectives, constantly scanning their environment for signs of acceptance or rejection. The phone-based childhood has taken this instinct and placed it in an environment that never stops judging. The first major driver of harm for girls is visual social comparison. Before 2010, a girl might compare her appearance to her classmates or to celebrities in magazines. Today, she compares herself to a global feed of hyper-curated, filtered, and often AI-enhanced images. Haidt argues that girls are not just seeing beautiful people, they are seeing engineered perfection. When they compare their own unedited daily reality to a polished highlight reel of their peers, the result is often a significant drop in self-worth. But social media is more than just a gallery of photos. It is a quantified social metric. In the past, you knew you were popular because of your friends. Today, social standing is printed as a number under a post. The like button serves as a real-time gauge of status. If a girl posts a photo and it fails to receive the expected level of engagement, her brain may interpret that as social exclusion. Because we are a social species, our brains are evolved to view exclusion as a survival threat. For an adolescent girl, this constant feedback loop can keep the brain in a state of hypervigilance. This leads to the second major driver, relational aggression. While boys often settle conflicts through physical aggression, which is usually brief and visible, girls often use relational aggression. This involves shaming, shunning, or damaging someone's reputation within the group. The virtual world has provided an environment where relational aggression can become constant and public. In the physical world, a conflict has boundaries. In the digital world, the shaming can follow a girl into her bedroom and stay active 24 hours a day. Haidt points toward the evidence that social media has intensified the prestigious social world for girls, making it a high-stakes arena where a single reputational mistake can feel catastrophic. This is a primary reason why we see the surge in internalizing disorders. Girls are turning the stress inward, leading to the unprecedented rise in anxiety, depression, and self-harm we see in the data. While girls are collapsing inward under social pressure, the situation for boys is markedly different, characterized by a retreat from reality and the closing of the traditional physical arena. To understand the crisis for boys, we must look at the concept of the arena. Historically, boys have gained status and competence through hierarchical competition in a physical space. They need a place to test themselves, to fail, and to build the skills required for adulthood. Haidt argues that over the last few decades, we have effectively closed the real-world arena for boys. We have safety-ized the playground and removed the risk from physical play. In many schools, high-energy behavior is pathologized rather than channeled. By the time the smartphone arrived, boys were already being pushed out of the physical world. The digital world offered them an alternative, a virtual arena that is effortless and zero risk. For many boys, the virtual world provides what Haidt calls pseudo-rewards. Let's look at video games. A game is designed to provide the brain with the sensation of achievement without the actual requirement of real-world effort. In a game, a boy can level up, lead a team, and gain status. His brain receives a dopamine hit similar to what a man might have felt after a successful hunt or building something with his hands. But when the console is turned off, the boy has gained no real-world competence. This is the effortless reward trap. Why would a boy take the risk of asking someone on a date and facing potential rejection when he can access the pseudo-intimacy of pornography? Why would he take a difficult entry-level job where he is at the bottom of the hierarchy when he can be a top-tier player in a digital world? The result of this move is a mass withdrawal. We are seeing boys drop out of higher education at record rates and staying out of the workforce. They are not necessarily anxious in the same way girls are. Instead, they are sedated. They are opting out of the challenges of the real world because the virtual world provides a more comfortable, lower-risk substitute. This failure to launch is a direct result of being experience blocked from the transition to manhood. This retreat and inward collapse are further complicated by a newer phenomenon: the rapid spread of digital contagion and sociogenic illness across these networks. Haidt describes sociogenic illness as psychological distress or specific behaviors spreading through a population via social learning rather than a biological virus. In the past, these contagions were limited by geography. If a group of students in a specific town developed a psychological tic, it stayed within that community. Today, digital networks have removed those firewalls. The algorithm acts as a super spreader. It identifies young people who are already in a vulnerable state, perhaps they are feeling lonely or struggling with their identity, and it provides them with content that validates their distress. The best current evidence suggests that we are seeing the rise of what some researchers call TikTok tics. Groups of teenagers, primarily girls, have developed complex motor tics after watching influencers who share videos of their own struggles with similar symptoms. These are not neurological disorders in the traditional sense, they are sociogenic. They are behaviors learned through digital immersion. The internet also provides a menu of identities and pathologies. Children in their sensitive period of identity formation may find a sense of community by adopting a specific label or diagnosis they found online. While this can provide a sense of belonging, it can also lead to a feedback loop of suffering. If a child's social world revolves around a shared diagnosis, they may be less motivated to recover, as doing so would mean losing their community. We have created a world where the algorithm prioritizes engagement, which often means prioritizing the most extreme and dramatized versions of mental distress. When we combine these gendered stressors with viral psychological distress, we begin to see the true cost, the systemic loss of cultural apprenticeship and social competence. To understand the full impact of these gendered harms, we have to look at what has been displaced. As we discussed in the biological section, human beings rely on a long period of cultural apprenticeship. We learn how to be adults by practicing in the real world under the guidance of peers and mentors. For girls, that apprenticeship once focused on navigating the complexities of physical community. It involved learning how to manage reputation, resolve deep-seated conflicts, and build real-world solidarity. Social media has replaced this with a digital performance that is often shallow and high stakes. For boys, the apprenticeship once focused on physical competence and the transition into responsibility. By moving their social and competitive lives onto screens, we have blocked that transition. We now have young men who are reaching their 20s with the social anxiety of a much younger child because they never had to navigate a real-world conflict or take a real-world risk. We are raising a generation that is digitally fluent but socially and emotionally experience-deprived. They are learning how to consume rather than how to live. They are building virtual prestige rather than real-world capital. This is the biological and social reality of the anxious generation. Recognizing this loss is the first step toward recovery, which requires us to look at the specific strategies for breaking the gendered trap. If we want to address these harms, we have to understand the logic behind them. We cannot treat the crisis for girls and the crisis for boys with a single, identical approach. For girls, the priority must be breaking the visual comparison trap. This means moving them away from curated, visual feeds and back into embodied, real-world groups where social interaction is synchronous and multi-sensory. We must help them find stillness and awe, moments where they are not being judged or quantified by an audience. For boys, the priority must be the restoration of the real-world arena. We have to push back against the culture of safetyism that has removed risk from their lives. We must give boys real-world challenges that are more rewarding than any virtual achievement. We have to allow them to face the risk of failure in the physical world so they can build the resilience needed to stand on their own. Haidt's argument is clear. We must rearrange our children. We have to understand that these gendered harms are symptoms of a larger environmental mismatch. We have taken an anti-fragile species and placed it in a biosphere of safety and screens. To fix it, we have to open the doors. We have to let the wind back in. We have to let girls face the risks of real-world social interaction, and we have to let boys face the risks of real-world physical and hierarchical competition. As we bring these findings together, let's review the key elements that define this part of the crisis. First, we have established that the mechanism of harm is sex-linked, targeting the relational sensitivity of girls and the hierarchical competition of boys. Second, we have seen how the visual feeds and relational warfare of the digital world have contributed to an epidemic of internalizing distress among girls. Third, we have examined how the pseudo-arenas of gaming and pornography have led to a mass retreat and a failure to launch for boys. Fourth, we have explored the role of digital contagion and the way algorithms can spread psychological symptoms through vulnerable networks. And finally, we have looked at the loss of the cultural apprenticeship. We are no longer training our children for adulthood. We are training them for digital dependency. The biological and social rewiring is profound, and the gendered harms are widespread. But the story does not end with the diagnosis. We are not just here to map the wreckage. We are here to implement the solution. In the final part, our goal is to show you exactly how to break the collective social traps that keep us paralyzed and how to implement a new set of foundational norms that can return childhood to the physical world. It is time to move from analysis to action as we explore the specific protocols for community-wide change in Part 4, Solutions and Collective Action. Part 4, Solutions and Collective Action. We have spent this time mapping the wreckage of gendered harms and identifying the specific ways the digital world has pulled our children away from reality. But a diagnosis without a treatment plan is only half the work. We are now transitioning to the most critical phase of this mission, the rescue operation. In this part, our goal is to show you exactly how to break the collective social traps that keep us paralyzed and how to implement a new set of foundational norms that can return childhood to the physical world. It is time to move from analysis to action as we explore the specific protocols for community-wide change. To understand why this change is so difficult for a single family to achieve, we must first look at the collective action trap and why individual effort often fails. The reason you have likely struggled to fix this problem in your own home is not necessarily a lack of willpower. As Haidt argues, the move to a phone-based life is what economists call a collective action problem. This is a social trap where a group of people would be better off if they all made a certain choice. But because they cannot coordinate, they each make the choice that seems safest for their own child in the moment. Imagine you are a parent who recognizes that a smartphone is hurting your child's focus and sleep. If you take the phone away, but every other child in the 7th grade still has one, your child is suddenly cut off from the primary social network of their peers. They miss the invitations to the park, the inside jokes, and the spontaneous group chats. By trying to protect your child, you have inadvertently socially isolated them. The social cost of being the first to act is often too high for any one family to bear. This is why Haidt emphasizes that we must move as a group. When we coordinate with other parents, the social cost disappears. If half the kids in a class do not have smartphones, then being unplugged is no longer a mark of isolation, it becomes a shared experience. To break the great rewiring, we must replace the current set of digital-first norms with a new set of real-world first standards. Haidt proposes 4 foundational norms that can serve as a master reset for adolescent development. Breaking this trap begins with the first foundational standard, which is Norm 1. No smartphones before high school. The first strategy is a commitment to delay the smartphone until high school, which is approximately age 14. It is important to be clear about what this means. This is not a recommendation to keep children in the dark or to deny them communication. It is specifically a delay of the smartphone, the portable high-speed gateway to the entire internet and its addictive algorithms. Haidt suggests that if a child needs a way to contact their parents, for example, if they are walking home from practice or staying late at school, the solution is a basic phone. This could be a flip phone or a device designed only for calls and texts. These tools provide the necessary security without the experience blockers of an infinite scroll or social media. Critics often argue that children need smartphones to gain tech literacy. However, Haidt argues that these devices are designed to be so intuitive that they require no training to use. A teenager can learn the interface of an iPhone in minutes. What they cannot easily learn, however, is the self-regulation required to resist an environment designed to exploit their dopamine system. By delaying the smartphone until age 14, we allow the brain's braking system, the prefrontal cortex, more time to develop before it is subjected to the high-intensity rewards of the digital world. Building on that delay, we must also address the most high-risk element of the virtual world, which leads us to Norm 2. No social media until 16. Haidt argues that we should aim to delay entry into these platforms until at least age 16. This recommendation is based on the converging evidence regarding the sensitive period of puberty. As we discussed earlier, the early years of adolescence are a time of intense social sensitivity and neural pruning. This is the worst possible time to subject a young person to the quantified social comparison and relational warfare of the digital world. By age 16, teenagers generally have a more stable sense of self. They have had more time to grow their stress wood in the real world. While they are still developing, they are often better equipped to handle the social pressures of the internet than a 13-year-old. Haidt points out that current laws often set the age of internet adulthood at 13, but this age was chosen for privacy reasons, not developmental ones. Moving this threshold to 16 would provide a necessary guardrail for the most vulnerable years of development. This norm requires parents to coordinate so that 16 becomes the new standard for entering the virtual social arena. While these home-based changes are vital, we also need to protect the environment where children spend the majority of their day, which brings us to Norm 3, the implementation of phone-free schools. The third intervention is one of the most effective tools we have, making schools phone-free for the entire duration of the school day. Currently, many schools allow students to keep their phones in their pockets or backpacks, using them during lunch, recess, and transitions. Haidt argues that this is a mistake that shatters the social and academic environment. Even if a phone is not in use, its mere presence in a pocket can be a distraction. Researchers call this brain drain, the mental effort required to ignore a device that might ping at any moment. When students have access to their phones during school, the hallway and the lunchroom become quiet, as students sit next to each other while staring at their individual screens. The goal is to make schools sanctuaries for attention. This means phones should be stored in lockers or lockable pouches from the first bell to the last. This policy forces the brain to return to discover mode and encourages students to look at one another. In schools that have implemented this change, administrators frequently report that bullying decreases and social engagement increases. The school day becomes a time for embodied community, providing children with 7 hours of deep social apprenticeship every day. However, removing the technology is only half the battle. We must replace that time with something better, which is the focus of Norm 4. More real-world independence and play. This final norm is perhaps the most important because it addresses the double mistake. Taking away the phone is only half the battle. We must replace that time with real-world experience. This norm focuses on reclaiming anti-fragility by encouraging unsupervised real-world play and independence. We must push back against the culture of safetyism that has made us fear the real world. This involves giving children what Haidt calls independence missions. This is the core of the Let Grow movement. It starts with small steps. For a younger child, it might be walking to the end of the block alone. For an older child, it might be taking the bus to a friend's house or going into a store to buy groceries without a parent. When we overprotect children from minor real-world risks, we prevent them from learning that they are competent and capable. We keep their brains biased toward defend mode. By allowing them to face small challenges on their own, we help them build the social calluses and confidence they need for adulthood. This norm requires parents to trust their children more and to resist the urge to hover. We must allow them to experience the wind of the real world so they can grow the roots they need to stand firm. Implementing these 4 norms requires more than just parental effort. It demands a coordinated strategy across all levels of society, which we define as the stakeholder protocol for collaborative action. To implement these norms, Haidt calls on every major stakeholder to play a specific role. For parents, the priority is coordination. You cannot be the mean parent in isolation. Reach out to the other parents in your child's grade. Form a pact to delay smartphones and social media. Share the data on the 4 foundational harms. When you move as a community, you create a new social reality for your children that values real-world connection over digital status. For schools, your goal is to protect the learning environment. Implement away-for-the-day policies. Do not just ban phones in the classroom, ban them in the lunchroom and the hallways. Support the Let Grow project by assigning students tasks that require real-world independence. Make the school a place where focus and community are the highest priorities. For governments, we need systemic guardrails. Governments should raise the age of internet adulthood to 16 and require robust age verification for social media platforms. We also need safety by design laws that hold tech companies responsible for creating addictive products. Laws should also be updated to protect parents who allow their children to play outside or walk to school alone, ending the era of over-policing normal childhood independence. For tech companies, there is a moral obligation to stop weaponizing adolescent psychology for profit. Companies should move away from engagement-based algorithms that prioritize outrage and comparison. They should implement ethical design standards that recognize the unique vulnerabilities of the developing brain. The experiment on the anxious generation has shown that moving fast and breaking things has real-world consequences for the mental health of millions. This recovery plan is not a sudden withdrawal from the modern world, but a strategic progression Haidt calls the ladder of independence, a step-by-step approach to childhood that gradually grants more freedom as competence grows. In early childhood, the focus is on local, real-world play. Between the ages of 10 and 12, we introduce community autonomy, letting them navigate their neighborhood and handle small responsibilities. At age 14, we might introduce a smartphone for utility, but without social media. Finally, at age 16, we allow entry into the virtual social world, but only after the child has built a strong, real-world foundation. By the time a young person reaches 18, they should have had hundreds of hours of experience navigating conflicts, managing their own time, and facing real-world risks. They will not be fragile, because they will have been seasoned by life. They will have the stress wood needed to support their own weight. As we conclude this part of the mission, let's summarize the recovery protocol and the steps we've defined. We've examined the how of the rescue mission and seen that the problem is not individual failure, but a collective social trap. We have identified the 4 new norms: no smartphones before high school, no social media until 16, phone-free schools, and more real-world independence. We have seen how parents, schools, and governments can coordinate to break the great rewiring. The transition from a phone-based childhood back to a play-based one is the most important task of our time. It requires us to be courageous, to be collaborative, and to be committed to the long-term well-being of our children. We have reached the end of the data and the beginning of your action plan. Throughout this analysis, we have dismantled the wreckage of the great rewiring. We have seen how a generation was moved from a play-based childhood on Earth to a phone-based existence on a metaphorical Mars. We have mapped the foundational harms, the gendered logic of digital distress, and the social contagions that have turned adolescence into an epidemic of anxiety. However, the final and most critical insight is this: this crisis is not an inevitable act of nature. It is the result of an environmental mismatch, and every such failure has a solution. If you feel as though you have lost control, it is because the technology changed faster than our culture could create guardrails. But that rewiring can be reversed. The human brain is resilient and anti-fragile. It is designed to seek out discovery and deep, real-world attunement. Your child is not broken. They are simply living in an environment that was not built for their well-being. This rescue operation begins with the implementation of the protocols we have discussed. It starts with a commitment to the 4 foundational norms that return childhood to the physical world. First, the smartphone delay. Do not be the parent who hands a 10-year-old a portal to the digital Wild West. Delay the smartphone until high school and provide a basic phone for communication. Second, the social media guardrail. Hold the line until age 16. A child's identity is too sensitive during the early years of puberty to be managed by a profit-driven algorithm. Let them build a real-world self before they attempt to navigate a virtual one. Third, the phone-free sanctuary. Work with your local school to ensure that the campus is phone-free from the first bell to the last. Restore the lunchroom and the playground as places for unfractured focus and community. Finally, the restoration of play. Push back against the culture of safetyism. Give your children back their free-range independence. Let them walk to the store, climb trees, and settle their own arguments. Let them grow the stress wood they need to stand tall. Remember that you cannot do this in isolation. You must move as a community. Talk to other parents, form pacts, and coordinate the change. When we move together, the social trap breaks, and our children finally have a place to land. We are not anti-technology. We are pro-human. We are not trying to stop the future. We are trying to ensure our children are strong enough to live in it. The experiment on Mars has provided us with all the data we need. The results are clear, and the failure is evident. It is now time to bring our children back to Earth. It is time to trade the infinite scroll for the infinite horizon and reclaim the childhood they were evolved for. The protocol is in your hands. It is time to reclaim the Earth. If you found value in today's session, make sure to hit the subscribe button and turn on notifications. We release new insights every week to help you stay ahead. Goodbye.